oxygen. Anyway, I'll come to y'all for offering and turn the Sunday school loose before they get mad at me over here. All right. You can make it over here. All right. Just kidding.
All right, good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. I wish there was a few more. You know, we've got some really good Sunday school teachers, and I'm not just patting myself on the back, but it's really a shame that more people don't come out for this, because I think this is part of my favorite time on Sunday. One of my favorite times is being together and learning together. We're just going to be starting a new study. You know, we've been talking about David. But we finished up. We got him to where he was king, where he actually became king. That's where our study on that one ended. And we're starting a new one today. And over the next several times that I'll be teaching, we'll be in Exodus chapters 7 through 12, if you just want to be reading ahead. And the overall theme of this study is about being a distinct people. Being a distinct people. So what does it mean to be distinct? Distinct. Recognizably different in nature from something else of a similar type. So clearly apparent to the mind as to be unmistakable, definite. Okay, so let's talk about just some examples to kind of wrap our mind around this. If I said to my husband, honey, will you grab the coffee cup out of the cabinet? You know, there's lots of different coffee cups that come in different sizes, different colors, different shapes. But if I said, honey, will you grab my scripture mug and fix me some hot chocolate? He's going to know to take the one in the middle. Now, none of these are mine. These are just off the internet. Because that cup is distinct. That's Susan's cup. And I do have a favorite mug that I always drink out of. Okay? It's distinct to me. Or my Aunt Pat. That's who I thought of when I saw it, because she loves those. Or if I said, oh, I need something to fix my hair. Well, there's different kinds of hair brushes. There are different kinds of combs. But if I say, I need my wide tooth comb to get this hair under control, you know which one it is. It's distinct from the other brushes and combs in the drawer. If I said, hey, Emma, grab that book off my nightstand. There might be a variety of books on my nightstand. These are some samples of what could be there. I don't know if anybody recognizes one of those books. It's a really good book if you haven't read it. It's by our own Jim Hershey. It's called Benny and the King. But if I said, bring me my Bible, she's not going to mistake it. Because if I might say, bring me that inspirational book, she might bring me Benny the King. She might bring me the Shack. She wouldn't know which one. But if I say, bring me my Bible, it's a distinct book. She knows exactly which book that is. Okay? People. People are very similar. We talked about this last week. Christine talked about this, how, we're all the same. We all bleed the same. We all have the same internal mechanisms that make our body work. It's just the outside that can look different. If you're out in the parking lot and they said, some woman in the church is looking for you, Pastor. He's like, okay, well, that narrows it down. It's a woman. What's she look like? Well, she had white hair and glasses. Oh, that was probably Sister Susan. This makes me distinct, right? Longer gray white hair and glasses. And talk. Okay, so we all have distinct physical characteristics. We're male or female, and yes, there is a difference. Short, tall, skin color, eye color, hair color, body types, birthmarks. And, those are things that we're born with that make us distinct. And we can even change up and accentuate these things. I've had my hair about every color it could be over the years. You can even change your eye color with contact lenses. I put on fake tan in the summertime. So there's a lot of things you can change. Even the way you dress. I was looking at a website or a thing on Facebook. It was people that back in like the 90s dressed like the emo look, and how they look today, because they grew up. Kids go through those phases. They're not going to look like that their whole life, hopefully. But another way we distinguish ourselves is by who we are in Christ. That's how we distinguish ourselves from everybody else. Now, when you walk through a crowd, can you right away tell who's a Christian and who's not? No, not right away. You can't necessarily go by appearance. So what are some ways that we can make ourselves distinct to show that, if we go back to that definition, that we have a recognizably different nature than other people who are similar to us, that show that we have a recognizably different nature than people who are of the world? What can make us distinct? The bun. What else? If it's not by clothing, what are ways? By their language, yeah. Okay. What else? How about our attitudes? I was going to say, how about our attitudes? The way that we look at things, or the way we believe about things. What else? He really made a statement in his dress and his talk. Everything that he did made a statement. So by our actions, the way we treat people, we say we're a Christian, but then we chew out somebody at, the retail store because our order was wrong or something. By our habits. Oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm hanging out at the bar every night. That's a discrepancy there. Again, by our appearance, like you were saying, but also, by being friendly, by being welcoming, by showing that we care for other people and we're not grouchy and reclusive, which sometimes I would rather be, but I make myself get out there. Yeah. Pastor, he recently spoke on 1 Peter 2:9. Our next slide. Says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are people of God." So he made a distinction, right? Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So God has made a distinction with us. The Israelites were God's chosen people, and as Christians, we're grafted into that. We are God's chosen people, and he has set us apart. He has separated us from the world. He has made us distinct. Now, we still have to be operating in that world, but we're in it, but we don't have that. We don't have a worldly mindset. Okay? So as we study Exodus 7 through 12, we're going to see how God demonstrates that, one, he is distinct among all other gods. You know, there's a lot of gods out there that people worship, but he is distinct. And number two, that he has made his people distinct among all the people of the world. Okay? So as we begin chapter 7, Moses and Aaron have already made an initial request to Pharaoh in an earlier chapter. And it did not go well. So when they went to him saying, you know, that our God has said, let my people go into the wilderness so that they can have a feast, they can sacrifice to me, we've made that request. In Exodus 5:2, we see Pharaoh's response. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. Okay? Pharaoh does not recognize God. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't recognize his authority. Pharaoh sees himself as the only authority. You know, he's Pharaoh. He was kind of his own God. And he was looked at as sort of a god because he was in that position. And there were a lot of gods in Egypt. And, you know, Pharaoh's got to be thinking, a god of Hebrew slaves, huh? And they're slaves. They work for me. They do what I say. And I'm supposed to be afraid of a god of the slaves. Okay. No, I don't know this God. Who is this God to me? Why should I listen to him? That's Pharaoh's attitude. Okay? So this doesn't move him. But what it does do is it makes him angry. He gets very angry. And he orders the slave drivers to make it even harder on the Hebrew slaves. I mean, he could have just said, oh, get these guys out of here and let's just keep going on as usual. But it made him mad because, you know, somewhere deep down he must have felt it somewhere. He said he didn't know this God, but somewhere that pricked his soul somewhere because it made him mad. Okay? Made him mad, and he said, let's make it harder on them. You know, let's make, you know, it's going to take them longer. They're going to have to get their own materials. We're not going to make it easy on them. They must be lazy, or they don't have enough to do if they think they have time to take off several days and go out to the wilderness and have a party and come back. They're just lazy. So let's make it harder on them, okay? And so this increased unfair work burden caused the Israelites then to get mad at Moses and Aaron, right? Thanks a lot, Moses. Thanks a lot. All this talk you have about God, and this is where it got us. We got to work harder now. Thanks a lot. Okay? Being distinct does not come without a cost. People may not like the choices you have to make to stay true to your call to God. Okay? And you may face persecution. You may face rejection. You may face retaliation. You may face ridicule. So even though Moses and Aaron had told the people everything God had told Moses, you know, he was going to rescue them from the Egyptians, and Moses performed signs to them, the signs that God showed him that he could do, he showed to them, and they worshiped God. What happened at the first sign of trouble? They just threw up their hands and got mad. Well, this is going to get me. That happens sometimes to new believers. They start hitting, well, I thought everything was going to be great. No, your trouble's just starting. But God will get you through it. So you can imagine, you know, we're getting up now here close to chapter 7. You can imagine how Moses felt when God told him he was sending him back to Pharaoh to tell him some more things. You see how well it worked out the first time. So this actually starts at the very end of Exodus 6, 28 through 30. It says, and it came to pass on the day the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I am the Lord. Speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses said before the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips, and how shall Pharaoh heed me? Now, in the NIV, it says of faltering lips. He could have had, some people think that he had a stutter. Uncircumcised lips. We think of uncircumcision, that's not in covenant, sinful, heathen. You know, he may not have felt qualified. You know, just like when Isaiah said, had the coal, burn his lips with coal. He wasn't raised a Hebrew, even though, he was. He was raised as an Egyptian prince, and then he ended up out in the wilderness. So he may not have felt like, who am I? And he does say, who am I to do this? So, he's full of doubt, and he's unsure of himself. Back in Exodus 4, he has this same discussion with God. Exodus 4:10, then Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." So that kind of lends more to the idea that maybe he did have a stutter. He wasn't good at getting up in front and talking to people, didn't really, feel like he was an eloquent speaker. Sometimes we let things like that hold us back. Well, God didn't intend you to be necessarily the most eloquent speaker. He just wants to use you. Moses is focused on his weakness, which really is where God is the strongest in us, though Moses doesn't know this yet. And he lacks confidence. And it angers God. God, it says that God was angry with it. Anger burned toward Moses. But he ends up sending Aaron to help him. So Exodus 7:1-2. So the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of his land." So he says, I have made you as God. Now we know Pharaoh had already rejected God. I don't know who this God is. I don't know. I have to listen to him. That old kids say, "You're not the boss of me." He isn't even going to entertain the idea of dealing with this God that he doesn't know. And, he didn't know that Moses is really going to be the only representation of God that Pharaoh's going to see, because Pharaoh's not going to seek out God. He's not going to listen to God. Pharaoh thought of himself as a God, and he would see Moses. That would be the only a thing of God that he would see. And sometimes we're the only thing of God people see. And Aaron then would become the prophet. Moses was the prophet that God chose. But now he said, I'm going to make you as God, and Aaron will be your prophet. If we go back to Exodus 4:15-16, it says, "Now you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth, and with his mouth I will teach you what you shall do. So he shall be your spokesman to the people, and he himself shall be as a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God." Okay, so a prophet hears from God and speaks to the people, correct? Okay. So Moses was the prophet, and God spoke to him, and he was supposed to speak to whoever God sent him to. But Moses either couldn't or wouldn't do it, okay? So God's made Moses like God and made Aaron his prophet. Aaron would receive the word from Moses, who received it from God. Aaron was not a true prophet like Moses, but operated as a prophet on Moses' behalf. Think about ventriloquists, have ventriloquist dummies, and how it's their voice and they can do different characters. The dummy itself has no ability to speak on its own, okay? It can only say what the ventriloquist says. So Moses would give him the words to speak. So let's just kind of do this as kind of an example. So we have Danny and Christina, if y'all will stand up. Okay, you're Aaron, or you're Moses, and you're Aaron. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to tell you. God could only say, or Aaron could only say what God had said to Moses, and then Moses said to Aaron. Aaron could not speak on his own or give a message to Pharaoh, to the people, or anything of his own. It had to come through Moses, because he made Moses as God to Pharaoh, and then Aaron was Moses' prophet. Thank you, guys. Okay, so I want to make sure that you understood that. Aaron did not hear from God, he heard from Moses. Yeah, when you're later on in that study. So sometimes we are as God to others. Those who have rejected him, who won't seek him, who won't have anything to do with any kind of religion or anything, we are the only representation of God, of Christ, that people will encounter. Okay? I liked this quote. Gosh. It says, believers are like letters written by Jesus that the whole world reads. People that won't look to God look at us. Those who won't read the Bible read our life. This is echoed in 2 Corinthians 3, verses 2 through 3. It says, you yourselves are our letters, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone. You show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. So we are like a letter from Christ to the people that we're around. Okay, back to Exodus 7, verses 3 through 6. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hands on Egypt and bring my armies and my people and the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. Then Moses and Aaron did so just as the Lord commanded them, so they did. And Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. Okay. So as we go through these chapters, we're going to see several times where God says he will harden Pharaoh's heart. So I want to talk about that for just a second. Pharaoh's heart was already hard. Okay? It was hard to start with. He had already rejected God and denied God's existence and authority. He had been cruel to the Hebrew slaves and made their labor even more difficult. And God would, because of the things that God was going to do, it would continue to harden Pharaoh's heart. Because God was going to demonstrate his distinctness. He was going to demonstrate his power and authority. And those things were only going to cause Pharaoh to harden his heart more as he railed against God. So it's not like God set out to do Pharaoh in. Pharaoh had already made that choice. And the things that he was going to do were going to just further harden his heart. Okay? In Romans, next page, Romans 1, 24 through 25, then 28. It says, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. So, a reprobate mind is what you hear in the King James Version, which means depraved, wicked. You know, Pharaoh served Pharaoh. He worshipped the creature himself, not the Creator. And he answered to no one. Okay, Exodus 7, 8 through 10. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, show a miracle for yourselves, then you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and let it become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they did so, just as the Lord commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. So Moses had performed this particular miracle or event, this sign, before. when he was with God, God had Moses do this. Remember, he threw down the staff and it turned into a snake, and Moses got scared and ran. And he said, no, just pick it up back by the tail, and it turned back into the rod. And then he and Aaron also, they did these signs for the Israelites when they brought them together to tell them, God remembers you. He remembers our people. He's going to rescue us. And they had those signs that they were able to show that God really was with them. And just as an aside from this, I thought, what a wonderful thing. Because that message is still the same today. It's that hope that we can tell people there is a God who remembers you. There's a God who knows you and that loves you and wants to save you out of your bondage. That's a great hope that we can share with people. Now, the study that I read said that the Hebrew words for the snake or serpent, there was a different one used from when Moses initially did it to this time. And the Hebrew word here was tannin, which means great serpent. So this was probably quite an impressive, it could have been like a cobra. Some said it, the other translation for tannin is sea monster. So it was something nasty. Something I would run out of the room if I saw it. Okay. There was even a big thing on there about it being a crocodile because that was symbolic of Egypt, but I don't think it really matters. It was something big. And there's also a verse in Ezekiel where God calls Pharaoh the great dragon. So, great serpent, the great dragon is tannin. This is what the rod became. But then in verses 11 through 13. But Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. So the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. For every man threw down his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them as the Lord had said. So Pharaoh's magicians were able to perform this same supernatural act, but from a different source of power. Okay? Satan also has the power to do signs and wonders to an extent. So here's a couple scriptures. 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 10. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And in Revelation 13, verses 13 through 14, he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So Satan has powers to an extent. Okay? But God's power is greater. His rod, his great serpent, swallowed up all the other ones. Okay? Satan could not overpower what God had done. He could not overturn what God had done. He could only imitate it. Okay? If they had any true power, they would have had something that would have destroyed Aaron's rod, his serpent. But they couldn't do that. So the fact that the magicians were able to do the same thing, Pharaoh was not moved. And his heart continued to harden. Okay? Didn't change anything. Exodus 7, 14 through 18. So the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning when he goes out to the water, and you shall stand by the river bank to meet him. And the rod which was turned to a serpent you shall take in your hand. And you shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews has sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But indeed, until now you would not hear. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in this river with the rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die. The river shall stink, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink the water of the river. So the message to Pharaoh is consistent. It's the same as the very first time they went to see him. Let my people go so they can worship in the wilderness. Now, he doesn't say, just let my people go and we're going to leave and you won't have any more slaves, does he? He says, let my people go just for this time period, to go into the wilderness to worship me. Pharaoh couldn't even do that. If he couldn't even do that, there was no way he could handle letting them go entirely, right? You know, God gives us something little first to see if we can handle it, if we can obey that, if we can stick to that before he gives us something this big. Okay? Pharaoh said he didn't know the God of the Hebrews, but he's about to find out who he is, because he tells him, I'm doing these things so you will know that I am Lord. You're going to find out who I am. Okay? So this is the first of the 10 plagues. Now, the definition of a plague, today we would think of an epidemic disease. You know. But in this context, it's a widespread affliction, calamity, or evil, especially regarded as a direct punishment by God. And we're going to see a pattern here with these plagues. There's 10 of them. So it's 2 plagues with warning, 1 without. 2 plagues with warning, 1 without. 2 plagues with warning, 1 without. And then the very last one comes with a very big warning. Okay? Exodus 7:19 through 21. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron. So again, he's telling Moses to tell Aaron, because Aaron's the one that's going to do it. But Aaron can only do it if Moses tells him. Say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, over all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in buckets of wood and pitchers of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded. So he lifted up the rod and struck the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. The fish that were in the river died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water of the river, so there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Okay, so, you know, this was not a matter of the water just turning color and looking red. Now, I read that there are some things, like especially in the Nile, the certain sediments that certain times a year, if they collect up to, you know, that the water gets like a reddish color. And I've heard of like red tides and things like this. But that doesn't happen on command, okay? That's just over nature, over time. So this really was blood. Now, remember how I said that God is going to show how he's distinct from other gods? There were several Egyptian gods associated with the Nile River, okay? The word plague we talked about, the Hebrew words for plague mean blow or strike. So each plague, in addition to affecting the Egyptian people and Pharaoh, is going to be a blow or a strike at one of their gods, okay? Their gods couldn't do anything. God had turned the water to blood. Where were their gods? Why weren't they taking care of this problem? They had a god named, I'm going to say it's Khnum. It's Khnum. He was the guardian of the Nile. He didn't do much to protect it. They had Hapi, Hapi, who was the spirit of the Nile. Okay? Osirai, the Nile was supposed to be his bloodstream. Well, it turned blood. The Nile itself was worshipped as a god. And you know, this event is recorded in some ancient Egyptian records in the papyrus about the Nile becoming blood and being undrinkable. And it said that many servants left their masters at that time. So this attacked something that they associated with their gods, the river, because the river was essential to their life. And so they even had more than one god associated with it. So not only did it become a problem for them in that they didn't have any water, which they needed for life, it attacked their beliefs of this God. God was showing he was distinct from those gods, that he was the one that had the power. Verses 22 through 25. Then the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them as the Lord said. And Pharaoh turned and went to his house. Neither was his heart moved by this. So all the Egyptians dug around the river for water to drink, because they could not drink the water of the river. And 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the river. So again, the magicians were able to duplicate this sign by the power of Satan. The Egyptians were able to go and dig some fresh water, so they were able to get some water, and the magicians were able to show that they could turn that to blood. They could do the same thing. So again, Pharaoh, he's not moved by this. He's not, concerned about it. Now, if the magicians had any real or superior powers to God, they would have been able to change the water from blood back to water. But they couldn't do that. All they could do was copycat. That's all that Satan can ever do, is do his best to copycat what God does. God is a distinct God, clearly set apart and recognizably different, as our definition said, in nature, and there is no other God like him. And he has made us to be a distinct people. So we need to think about that. Do people recognize this in us? Is our faith evident? Are we being distinct in our walk? Are we distinct? So as we go through, we're going to be looking at each of these plagues and looking at them in the same way, looking for those 2 points, and what God has to show us about being a distinct people. Okay? So I hope y'all are excited about it. I hope you all will be reading ahead. And that's what I have for today. Does anybody have anything? All right. Y'all remember Ella. She's down in her back.